Everyone brought their children inside when my grandpa drove his truck. He would get busy looking at the neighbor's cow and drift to one side of the road, and people in our town knew to look out for him, but visitors had near death experiences. I rode with my grandpa in his truck to the orchard once, and it scared me to death, and I'm a thrill seeker. When I told my mother about this scary ride, Mother insisted my dad have a talk with Grandpa. Grandpa finally gave up his truck keys. Life got a little safer because Dad and his siblings spoke up. Being bold with people you love can be hard to do. When I was in junior high, I had a similar experience. I attended an early morning seminary class. Each morning, I would prepare to attend this class in a half wakened routine. Bathe, dress, backcomb my hair. Big poofy hair was the in thing back then. And comb the top hairs down, apply mascara, put on my socks and shoes, and left for school. One morning, the neighbor's cat was having kittens out in the garage. I was half through my morning routine when I saw what was happening, and I ran to the garage to see these new creatures. When I came back to the house, I really had to hurry to get off to school. When I got to school, my teacher looked at me and said, "Rough night?" I just looked at him puzzled. And two boys walked in, and they looked at me and laughed, and I thought, how immature and rude. One of my friends arrived and looked at me, grabbed my arm, and escorted me to the restroom. And there I saw my reflection and gasped. I had left home with my hair back combed, and I hadn't combed down the tops of the hairs it to make me look cute. Instead, I looked like I'd stuck my finger in a light socket and been electrocuted, not executed. Well, I may have been executed if I was electrocuted. Um, I quickly combed down my hair and returned a little embarrassed to class. I was so grateful for a friend that interfered. There are times to support and time to intervene, and that's what good friends do. Sometimes the kindest thing to do for others is to be bold enough to tell them they need to change. You could change a life or at least some embarrassment for somebody you care about. The founders of our Constitution knew we needed a change from the Articles of Confederation. It wasn't going to be easy to convince all the Americans it was for the best. They had to educate them and help them as citizens to maintain their newly fought for freedoms. Last time we talked about the three-headed eagle symbol and discussed the vertical line of power for the states in our Constitution. The states' objectives are merely civil and domestic. They are to support laws. The federal government has no business in local matters. State government gives them the advantage of small republic meetings meeting their unique needs. The states have the rights to protect themselves from the federal government. States nowadays oversee agriculture, education, um, health, safety, liquor, gambling, drugs, public moral behavior, welfare, tax, commerce, courts, define crime and punishment, schools, roads and bridges, and waterways. People are subject to the standards approved of by the majority of their representatives. This creates law and order in the states and in our nation. One of the signers of the Constitution, James Iredell, said, "There are two governments to which we owe obedience. The one is the federal government of the Union, and the other is the state government." And that is so true. The founders set up the states so they were a projection of the will of the people, not a branch of the national government. Can you see why voting knowledgeable at a local level is important? It keeps things in our life in order. Each state has its own constitution. They are all different. I'm going to show you the three-headed eagle again because we are going to talk about it. Whoops. Wrong icon. There we go. This three-headed eagle we talked about, the executive branch was one head, the legislative the middle head, and the judicial the third head. Notice that the legislative branch has two eyes representing the House and the Senate. Then there are two wings on this eagle. The wings are two ways to approach problems. What needs to be done, and the problem-solving wing of compassion. When you have one wing filling the people's needs and the other wing being compassionate to fill their needs. Well, what does the government have the power to do? Keeping in mind observing the nation's resources and people's freedom. That's what the other wing is about. The other wing is an approach of, is it keeping the national interests and resources and people's freedom intact? Or do we show compassion to these people over here? When both wings do their job, the nation can fly straight. If wing number one tries to solve the problems in an effort to save money or preserve the status quo, then the government loses credibility and drifts towards anarchy as the people decide to take matters into their own hands. So this is the dilemma between the two to keep them flying straight, making sure everybody's needs are met and being compassionate at the same time. Then we have the claws down here. One of them holds the olive branch of peace for home and abroad, and the other claw holds arrows, which represent the defense of our Constitution and freedoms. There's only one neck, if you'll notice, that holds them together. One neck, even though each head is independent, it couldn't function without the consent of one or both of the other heads. This form of government is ideally in the center of the tyranny and ruler spectrum. This is what the Constitution is about, is forming our government structure with checks and balances from the three branches of the government to prevent anyone from becoming all-powerful. And then came the Bill of Rights and the amendments, and that added to it, of talking about more specific rights for the people. But the majority of the Constitution is just about these three branches of the government. We're going to talk about enemies of the Constitution for a minute. Communism is one enemy of the Constitution. It's been lived in Russia. It was started in Russia with Lenin. The root word for communism is common. It means they have things in common. It is a society in which there is no such thing as private property or private businesses. All land and goods are owned in common. Sir Thomas More wrote a wonderful book called Utopia about this, and it was a form of communism. But that communism was different. Communism has been tried around the world many times. The modern communism as we know it is different, though. It is based off the writings of Karl Marx, who lived in the early 1800s. He said a worker cannot get all that he produced. The surplus always went to the employer. This is capitalism. That's the type of economy we have here. He taught the government should be controlled by the workers, and they should get the entire product that they produced. All the poverty, private and inherited property should disappear. The problem is when the control of the properties took place, it had to be by force, by the workers, which meant the workers had to take up arms and fight for the businesses and the land. And then a governing group was needed to establish law and order. This put the very few elite in charge and the people at their mercy and not owning anything. If you ever wonder why things look so poor in Russia, they don't own anything. There's no ownership. There's no reason to make them look nice and lovely because they don't own it and it could be ripped out from under them at any time. The government controls and owns everything. You are there to serve them. There's a story about Eldridge Cleaver that is an eye-opener for most people. He was a black man who was arrested and spent 15 years in prison for violence and robbery. While in prison, he became an atheist and a communist. He wrote a book for the Black Panthers on how to take over America and put the blacks in power. The Black Panthers were a militant motorcycle gang. When Eldridge got out of prison, he helped them organize and he helps planned revolts, and they ended up bringing bombs and guns to black neighborhoods, and he was wounded in one of these conflicts. He fled for his life and went to Cuba. He thought he would love it there, away from the American government. He soon lost respect for the Cuban dictator Castro. He saw too much government control. He and his wife were not happy there. And so he and his wife left there for Venezuela, another left-sided socialistic country then. He disagreed with the government control there, and he became converted to Christianity and resolved to have a strong moral character and longed for the freedoms in the USA. He then asked the federal government if he could come back home. He said, "I was wrong, and the Panthers were too. We black Americans are inside the system. I feel the number one objective for blacks is to recognize that they have the same equal rights under the Constitution as Ford and Rockefeller." He said he pursued truth from books and the scriptures and wise men and found his way home to true freedom. Sometimes you don't know what you got until you lose it. The next one that is an opposer to the Constitution is fascism. Fascism was used in Italy by Mussolini during World War II. The government controls all money and leaves the people poor, creating upper class and lower class, no middle class. It instills fear and it uses brutal force. And very similar to fascism is Nazism. Nazism was used in Germany by Hitler. Dictatorship uses violent means to eliminate people so a few might have a higher lifestyle. The dictator chooses who is elite and who gets killed in mass graves. No freedoms for the public. It instills great fear. Another one that is opposed to our government and our Constitution is socialism. It's used today in most of Europe and English Commonwealth countries. The people may own their land, but are heavily taxed. The government owns and runs all businesses for the profit of the people. The government chooses the wages and the positions in the businesses. Who gets to be supervisors, who gets to be the CEOs, they get to choose all that, which means limited income for most households that are living socialism. I found a letter by Ann Landers And Ann Landers wrote for a newspaper back in the 1960s. She she wrote how to, you asked your questions, and she would say whether it was proper etiquette for certain things or whether how to handle certain situations. She would give advice. But one of her articles, she talked about different forms of government. And this analogy was so good, I wanted to use it. So this is what Ann Landers had to say. If you live where there's socialism, it's like owning 2 cows, but the government says you have to give one to your neighbor. I'm going to take that off. And then if you're living where there's communism, you and you own 2 cows, then in a communistic country, you give both cows to the government and they may give you some milk. If you're living in a fascist government, you have 2 cows and you give all the milk to the government and the government sells it and you have no profit. If you are living in a Nazism government, you have 2 cows and the government shoots you and they take your cows. If you're living where there's anarchy, you have 2 cows, you keep your cow, you shoot the government agent, and you steal another cow from somebody else. It's total anarchy. There's no law, no order, no sense to it, and it's hard to live with people like that. Okay. And if you live where there's capitalism, like there is with our government, if you have 2 cows, you can sell 1 cow and take the money and buy yourself a bull. And then you can have many cows. There's no limit to how much you can have. That's the type of government that we have. I thought it was a great analogy. So I had Christy buy me some little cows. She went on the lookout for them and she found some. I love this analogy. We still fight terrorism attacks today by people wanting to undo our Constitution. The recent threats by Iran and their weapons is one. Some attacks are from other countries, but some are internal citizens of our own country. I have a story of 2 different senators that fall in that category. The first is Senator Joseph Clark of Pennsylvania. When he was made a senator, he put his hand on the Bible and swore that he would uphold the Constitution. But in legislature, he said, denouncing the legislative function provided for by the founders, he said, we have inherited from our forefathers a government structure that is so divides the powers that an effective dealing with economic problems is cumbersome because we have three parts to our government. And so you have to get an okay from one or both of them in order to make laws go through. And to him, that's cumbersome. Of course, inaction is what the founding fathers intended. Inaction until such time when an overwhelming consensus was prepared for action. They were right in their day, but they are wrong in ours. I have no hesitation stating my deep conviction that the legislature of America, local, state, and national, are presently a great menace to the successful operations of the democratic process. The executive should be strengthened at the expense of the legislature. Surely we have reached a point where we can say that Jefferson was wrong, that government is best when the governed is less. This was in 1963. Then another governor who fought against the Constitution, having done the same thing, put his hand on a Bible and pledged that he would uphold it. William Fulbright of Arkansas, advocating massive presidential powers strictly forbidden by the Constitution. The president is hobbled in his task of leading the American people to consensus and concerted action in the restrictions of the powers that are imposed upon him by the Constitution. It was designed for an 18th century society far removed from the center of world powers. The president alone among elected officials can rise from prejudice and bigotry and private pressures, and he ought to be able to make these decisions alone. In his role as teacher and moral leader, can you imagine having a president who's a teacher and a moral leader? It's been a long time. Can hope to overcome the excesses and the inadequacies of the public opinion that is all too often ignorant of the needs and dangers of opportunities of the foreign relations. It reminds me of a quote by Thomas Jefferson. Matter of fact, this quote inspired me to do this podcast. Thomas Jefferson said, "If we think the people not enlightened enough to exercise their control with good discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to educate them. This is the true correction of abuses of the Constitution." We've come so far to have the freedoms to be able to not be oppressed by a president or a king. We can't be giving more rights to one of the executive branches, one of the branches of government over the other. It is important that we break out of the intelligent confines of cherished and traditional beliefs of the Constitution and open our minds to the possibility that basic changes in our system may be essential to meet the requirements of the 21st century. That's what Fulbright was suggesting. The founders felt a great challenge to civilized man in discovering some method of structuring a government under the control of the people, which could eliminate both anarchy, mob rule, and the other end, tyranny of kings. Studying thousands of years of many different societies, with trial and error of those governments, helped the founding fathers come up with the Constitution. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was written in a form of truths. If a change to this formula for freedom were to be considered, it should be most carefully considered and be the people, not some professional, political, power-hungry elite that makes that decision. This is why I feel a desire to study the Constitution with you. I think all Americans should know what it says so we can protect it. I think all Americans should read the Communist Manifesto also. It's to understand our enemy's intentions. These two documents do affect us every day. It should be important to us. Be grateful for your 2 cows and make wise choices. God be with you till we meet again.